We're going to go over lowest common denominators. Okay? And denominator is referring to the bottom of a fraction. The top of the fraction is called the numerator. But as a skill for adding and subtracting, we need to know how to find a common denominator. Now, technically, to add and subtract, it does not have to be the lowest. But it does make things simplest if we are able to find the lowest common denominator. Okay? So we have two values here. 3 and 4. One way to find just a common denominator, and this might be the best method for some of you guys, a common denominator here, is to actually just take the denominators from each of the fractions and multiply the other one. So what do we mean by that? Sorry, I'll do this one in blue here. If I just take the 4 and multiply by 3, and I take the 4 here and multiply by 3. So essentially what we're doing is we're multiplying the bottom of this fraction, and the top technically, by the denominator of the other one. Now, whatever we do to the bottom of a fraction, we must do to the top. So if I'm going to multiply the bottom of that fraction by 4, I have to multiply the top of the fraction by 4. And same with the other one. So in this case, we end up with 4 over 12. 4 times 1 is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And in our other one, we have 6 over 4 times 3 is 12 again. So we end up at the same common denominator. Now, did this happen to be the lowest common denominator? What would have been a lower common denominator? 2. That is the lowest common denominator. And maybe a way we should go through this, another way we can see it, is by going through multiples of the numbers. So, when we're looking for a common denominator, let's say we take that value of 3, and we take this value of 4, okay? And we have to find the multiples of these numbers, okay? So in other words, we're looking for 3 times 1, which will give us 3, and 4 times 1 gives us 4. Are these values common? No. So we continue this pattern. I'm going to move this over just a little. We're going to continue this pattern over. So we multiply by 2, by 3, by 4, and even by 5. Okay? So we have to know our multiplication tables. 3 times 2 would give us 6. 3 times 3 would give us 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. We do the same thing with the number 4. 4 by 2 is 8. 4 by 3 is 12. 4 by 4 is 16. 4 by 5 is 20. So we look for a common value here. What's the first common value you see? Now there are other common values. In fact, we could have gone up to 24. 24 would have been a common value, and we could have used that as a common denominator. But this happens to be the lowest one in this case. Okay, so let's move these questions down a little. Give me a sec. Okay, we reorganized. Here's question 2. Like we said before, the fastest way to find a common denominator is to take the denominator from the other fraction and multiply it by the opposite fraction. So in this instance, the value of 7, I would multiply this top and bottom of this fraction by 7. And this fraction here of 2, I'd multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by 2. Okay? The reason we do the top and bottom is because whatever you do to the top or bottom, you must do to the other. So in this case, 5 times 2 gives us 10. Oh, you're so good at that. 7 times 2? There you go. 3 times 7? 2 times 7? 14. Okay? So again, we're left at a common denominator. Now, is this the lowest common denominator between them? It is. And we could check that by quickly writing out the multiples of the numbers again. Okay? I'll do it quickly. By 1, by 2. 2 is going to take a really long time. But the reason this is important, and you'll know if you have the lowest common denominator, let's go through these. Technically, this value is 2. So we know we've already multiplied 7 by 2. So there's only one option lower than 2. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. So we couldn't have gone lower because we know there's no multiple for 2 to get to 7. Okay, so this was kind of a shortcut I took here. If you guys look, yes, I do want that. Give me a sec. Good. If we look over here, as soon as we get to the opposite value when multiplying, we know that if that ends up being the lowest value, then that's as low as it's going to be. And that's what we started with here. We decided just multiply by opposite fractions. So do the same method with the next value here. Same idea. If I take this 2, I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by 2. We take this 8, top and the bottom by 8. In this case, we get 8 over 16 and 4 over 16. Now, these are common denominators. Are these the lowest common denominators? No. These are not the lowest common denominators. Okay? So, in order to find a lowest common denominator from here, once we're at this point, we would have to find a value, one single value, that is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. That single value has to be able to divide into all of them. So you can start testing numbers out. Okay? For instance, what number divides into 8? 8 goes in, but does 8 go into 4? It does? Not evenly. I can't divide 4 by 8 evenly. It gives me a half. Okay? What else is divisible into 8? 16 is a multiple, not a factor. 4. Okay. We can divide these by 4. And if we divide all of these by 4, what are we going to end up with here? 8 divided by 4 will give us what? 2. 16 divided by 4? 4 divided by 4 is? And 16 divided by 4 is? 4 again. These are actually a very low common denominator. Now, normally when looking at this, you wouldn't think to reduce this fraction. If you're very quick with your multiplication, you would think, okay, 2 goes into 8, I'll just multiply this fraction and get 8. But we could have reduced this actually to 4, this fraction, because it wasn't in simplest form. Okay? So, when asking for a lowest common denominator, a lot of the times it's best to just find a common denominator, and then from there, see if we can reduce both of the fractions. Okay? We can always work with common denominators. The lowest one just makes it simplest for us.